Today's panel discussion is on the topic of cost control and cloud, and why now more than ever is a good time for Azure Virtual Desktop from Microsoft. So welcome again. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Gadigal land, online as well as offline, on which we meet today, and pay our respects to our elders, past and present, and emerging. So this topic is part technical, part strategic, part cost savings, operational. So we'll talk all about it in the next 45 minutes. We've got a stellar panel. Jared Foley. Jared is the director of enterprise within Nerdio, and so he looks after all of Australia, New Zealand. Jared, am I right? Then we've got Shabaz Darr. Now, Shabaz is a senior cloud consultant at cubesys, but he's also a Nerdio MVP, and he's also a Microsoft MVP. So, someone who knows all about cloud and AVD. And we've also got our veteran senior cloud consultant from cubesys, George, who will sort of tandem with Shabaz in and out to talk about some of these topics today. Now, this discussion format is as usual. It will be recorded. It is being recorded. Please use the chat window to ask any questions, and we'll endeavor to answer those questions straight away. And if we can't, we'll reach out to you later with the right answer. And the video and the presentation will be shared with you later on as well. With this, I'm going to hand over to Shabaz. Let's kick it off, Shabaz.
Thank you, Astha. Thank you very much. So welcome, everyone. Today's panel discussion is really kind of designed to walk through the evolution of Virtual Desktop, VDI. And it's a journey that's taken us from a very complex, sort of rigid on-premises environments to now what we're seeing more intelligent, cloud-native sort of platforms that are powered by automation and AI. So again, I feel like with these sort of topics, when you want to talk about what's happening now, what's going to happen in the future, you need to really look at where you've been first. So what I'll be discussing with the panel is where VDI has been, so the legacy traditional on-premises deployments, where VDI is now within the industry, and where we feel it's going in the future, and what future trends do we think lie ahead. So on-premises VDI is kind of where it all started, right? And this was revolutionary for its time. But it did come with significant overhead. IT teams had to, manage everything from hypervisors to storage, and scaling was also very slow and expensive. Security was also a massive challenge, which it still is, I suppose, especially with data residing on endpoints. George, I'd like to come to you first, if that's okay, because I know we've got very similar backgrounds, right? We've both come from that on-premises world originally when we first started out. Could you talk a little bit about some of the administrative management complexities of legacy VDI that we've kind of come from?
Yeah, sure. So typically on-premise VDI, you had to have someone come and order all the parts, all the hardware, all the networking switches, SAN, storage, all of that stuff, right? So there was always someone that had to be involved, or other teams that had to be involved to help set up new hardware, new infrastructure to be able to deploy VDI. So things there like physical hardware, storage, the hypervisor level, any licenses that you needed, server licensing, so like HALs, and then going through all of the levels of testing the environment and ensuring that it's ready to go. You would also certainly have some sort of DR, high availability, backup solutions, etc. So when we look at sort of on-prem VDI, it was very tedious, and there was a lot of steps involved to even sort of have something there to present to users, or even to get to the testing stage. So it was weeks and weeks on end to be able to go about and essentially spin something up.
Yeah. Jared, I want to bring you in because George just mentioned around, having to get all that sort of physical kit up front. Can you just talk a little bit about that burden and the complexities that sort of that sort of heavy capex brought to organizations?
Yes, yeah, certainly, mate. I kind of like to use the odd analogy or two. So it really was a build it and they'll come sort of, approach where if we kind of needed to build a solution that potentially supported 1,000 users, you needed to spec out capacity, manage size, the environment to suit that. But if there's only 100 users on the environment, for example, your cost per user has gone up by 10 times. So again, it's like building the church for Christmas Eve. You actually need to build the environment, build it to a particular size that's going to support those users. Because, say example, 12 months later, 2 years later down the track, you want to actually expand that solution. There may be, you may not be able to procure the same blades that you had. Do you have the same storage capacities at delivering the right performance? It was kind of fraught with those challenges where essentially those on-premises solutions were really quite hard to sort of dynamically scale and really deliver based on what actual end users required at that point in time versus being that kind of static deployment. And to your point, became quite a capex heavy approach because you needed to kind of do all of that upfront investment, assuming that users were going to get the value out of the solution. It became a lot harder to be able to capacity and manage over time.
I think, Jared, you 100% hit the nail on the head there when you said, you need to spec it for pretty much your worst case scenario, right? Even though you're not always guaranteed concurrent user countage, you're always 100% going to need to spec for the worst user scenario, and then throughout the year, that's just wasted resources, right? If you're not using it. So we've come a long way when we start going into cloud for sure.
So I've got a question from the panel. So going back to the slide, it says the journey from complexity to intelligence in VDI. And I know that moving from legacy infrastructures to intelligent cloud-based systems for the last few years has been a journey depending on what an organization is. So in terms of the leadership perspective, like how can leadership teams best address those challenges from a change management perspective?
I mean, I think you need to apply a lot of the same principles because those base level principles are still the same. Because look, cloud is someone who kind of taught me a lot back in my early days kind of used to say, look, cloud is just the same kit but in someone's garage or someone else's data center, right? It's the same principles. I think if you came with the same principles but just evolve it to fit into that cloud model, I think that's probably the best approach. Because what I've seen a lot of is people think they need to change their whole mindset when it comes to cloud. You don't, especially when it comes to change management. The same principles need to apply. It's just implemented in a different way. I think that's probably the best way to approach it.
Yeah, there's also like a different mindset as well around, I think what it does enable is it allows you to be a little bit more precise around how you kind of map the different personas of your users to how you then sort of deliver that technology, versus kind of on-prem. It was a little bit square peg round hole. If you don't look like this, we don't really have a solution for you because we've kind of built this box and thou shall sort of fit into it. I think one of the additional kind of benefits and drivers from a leadership perspective is allowing people to basically take a more fine-tuned, granular view of kind of how they're delivering digital experiences to their end users, and then being able to kind of better curate those experiences to those individual personas without kind of adding additional burden of having to have all of these different bespoke solutions. If you were trying to build and model and then capacity manage that on-prem, that would become quite inflexible. The cloud kind of helps unlock and sort of enable that to be able to deliver those better kind of unique experiences as well.
Thanks, guys. That's it. That's what I was asking.
No, thank you. That's a really good question. So we've spoken a lot, and as you saw on the slide before this, there was a lot of upfront costs. We spoke about capex, buying hardware, etc. Those are very much in your face costs, right? But and George, something me and you spoke about this week was about some hidden costs and what I believe organizations sleep a little bit on is the actual administrative management overhead that actually, and again, you touched on it earlier, saying the amount of time it takes to actually get from the buying, implementing, testing, deployment, rolling it out. You've obviously touched on those complexities. Can you just give us, what are those actual tasks and what are the actual hidden costs when it comes to management?
Yeah, look, it's a whole bunch of stuff, right? I mean, if you think about physical infrastructure, you need to have someone to go and do the procurement process. You need someone to go and unbox the servers. You need someone to go and rack them in a data center. Look at all the networking, reserve IPs, management networks, install hard drives, etc. There is a lot of stuff there that is required to basically get a server up and running and functional for a VDI environment. I remember back in my day when I used to go and unbox servers and rack them, and you had to make sure that things were connected to like a UPS and dirty power and battery power, and ensure the management network is all up and running, etc., patching. There was a lot of stuff that was required to be able to get a VDI environment or just a server in any amount, right? Now with VDI, it's just a click of a button. So it is literally, you don't need to have someone that knows the physical infrastructure or the server or any other networking or anything like that, right? Click a button, you've got a VM, you're up and running within minutes with VDI essentially. So if you think about where we were, 10 years ago to pretty much now, we have come such a long way to be able to spin up resources so quickly, literally within the click of a button, and all of that physical infrastructure no longer required. You mentioned earlier that it's literally running a data center out of someone else's house, right? So it is an extension to your environment. So think of Azure as basically an extension to your environment that is, hardened and governed around your rules and requirements and your policies, to be able to spin up workloads quickly and efficiently.
And all we've touched on there is actually the setting up and getting it to the part of deployment. Once it's deployed, the amount of management it takes to water and feed it, we're talking patching, not just the actual virtual environment, but making sure your hardware's patched and up to date and it's got those security. There's so many more layers to it. I think that's going to be a good segue into where we are now. So that sort of shift to cloud. Specifically, obviously, we're going to talk about Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, right? That cloud VDI from Microsoft. And Microsoft's DAS, so desktop as a service offering, is very well known. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit more detail. Jared, I want to just come to you around this. You've obviously worked across EUC in many roles. More recently now, you're obviously Senior Director at Nerdio. I'm curious to understand your insights into that shift in mindset to sort of a cloud VDI compared to traditional, but also the sheer trajectory, right? It's taken off. I know probably COVID played a part in that, right? Such a short space of time. Just interested to understand your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I think COVID obviously played a big part around, I guess, people's wants and desires to be able to, dynamically, I guess, spin up these environments. But I think it's sort of, really helped demonstrate to a lot of organizations, I guess, the value in VDI. VDI has been around for a number of different years with various different names over the years. If I think way back, and this will probably carbon date me a little bit, I did my sort of first Citrix certification back in 2003. And, back then we could kind of deliver, a similar experience, to the end user, but the back end infrastructure that was, delivering it was very much different, right? So I think that end user experience has obviously evolved over time as, and I think one of the things that's really kind of accelerated the journey around the shift to DAS has really been, and you've got it there around the multi-section, is the shift away from a server-based operating system around delivering VDI, kind of tying that in with the desktop operating system and going away from kind of having end users logging into servers, for want of a better term, and the integration, to your point, around the M365 stack, making sure that tight integration and how, solutions look on a physical device, on a laptop, and then moving over to a VDI solution. 5 or 10 years ago, it was potentially a different experience where you might have had a different version of Office running on your physical device. When you jumped into your old Citrix or VDI solution, it was actually a different version, or it looked and felt differently. So I guess that consistency and evergreen nature and the way that Microsoft is kind of evolving that has really kind of leveled the playing field that ultimately a user should be able to get a similar look and feel and experience regardless of the way they're reaching or accessing that technology. And really that shifts to that OPEX model where people can be dynamic and think, less, going back to COVID again, but planning for the future is so hard. We've got AI and all these things are kind of tugging on our attention at the moment. So being able to just kind of grow as we require and shrink when we don't is really something that's kind of comfortable from an organizational perspective, because we just literally don't know what the next 4 months is going to look like. Like maybe with agentic AI, I'm going to need to spin up a whole bunch of virtual desktops to help support that, because I'm going to have a bunch of agents doing things that I normally would have had potentially, lower end staff potentially performing. So it really is acting as an enabler to be able to make those organizations just make those, without having to lock themselves into a solution, just make a decision with the technology that will evolve with them over time.
Some good insights there, Jared. So I suppose for an organization that's kind of maybe still in that on-premises VDI, there's obviously still a lot of vendors that are doing that. You mentioned Citrix, VMware, things like that. I suppose the question they're probably asking, so why should I move to DaaS, I suppose? And this whole sort of desktop as a service and move away from those physical sort of endpoints even as well. George, I just want to come to you first, if you don't mind. You've obviously done many migrations, right, in the last 5 years, specifically from those sort of older legacy platforms, including some of those we've just mentioned. Can you give me some insights into sort of the drivers, specifically the customer challenges that you've come across in your experience when doing these sort of migrations?
Yeah. So, look, it pretty much comes down to, each customer is unique. But what I find is a lot of customers are moving to specifically AVD because they're going to save costs in licensing, right? That's the biggest number one cost benefit there. You no longer need to run the additional hardware, the physical hardware. You no longer need to run additional brokers, servers, database, SQL, etc. You no longer need to have people that go about and manage all of these different platforms. With the whole cloud infrastructure thing, like I said, it's one click button, right? So we don't need multiple people or multiple teams to be able to go in and get involved to push a VDI infrastructure. We also don't need to worry about any sort of disaster recovery or resiliency or high availability, because if it was an on-prem environment, we would need to cater for an additional workload or a spare server or a data center or something like that to be able to spin up these workloads. Whereas in the cloud, you can think of it as like, unlimited resources. So when people look to move to, VDI or desktop as a service in the cloud, all of those hassles are, they're no more, they're eliminated, right? So we literally are governed by, all the rules or pretty much the benefits of the cloud, where we can say, click a button, I want resource in, Sydney or Melbourne or wherever. I want, 15 of these particular resources. Within a matter of minutes, they're up and running and provisioned and ready to go. So when we look at customers that want to move from on-prem into the cloud, we can do it in like weeks, right? We're not talking months, we're not talking project timelines, we're talking weeks, days, even hours at some point, right? So when COVID really hit early on, we were deploying AVD projects back then within 1-2 weeks and have a full production environment ready to go, because the resources were there, the capacity was there in Azure. Very little people were jumping on AVD back then, or WVD as it was called, and it was such a quick process. So,
and in that statement alone, George, there you've mentioned that transformation piece. We've gone from on-premises, which could be months potentially, to now weeks in getting it up and running, and from that first stage to the testing to full deployment. Jared, I just want to come to you for a second. It'd be remiss of me not to talk about Nerdio, because they're such a big player in that sort of EUC EUC area, specifically around that management of cloud VDI, right? And that's what we're really talking about today. We can see some of the industries now on the screen that are making that sort of move to DaaS. But can you give some examples why some of these industries, maybe something like financial services and governments, maybe, why are they, in your experience being with Nerdio, why are they actually moving to? What are their drivers to move to this?
Look, I think you're going to touch on this in some of the slides because yes, I have seen the slide pack. Usually the driver is, most of them have made an existing investment in obviously the Microsoft stack and those Microsoft technologies around M365, and technologies like AVD are obviously an entitlement in that stack. So it wouldn't be a commercially minded organization if you're not looking at what existing tools you've already got in the tool bag and trying to get more value out of those technologies. And when that is a VDI or DaaS type technology that's available to you and you're currently paying for another solution, you've obviously got to do that evaluation. The challenge there is obviously Microsoft is great at doing 75 or 80% of the heavy work, as they've always done in this space, whether it was the original terminal services, then RDS, and now sort of AVD. And there's always an additional kind of level of capability that's needed to then be able to operate and manage. And I guess that's where our sort of technology comes in and how we enable organizations to help, I guess, get the most out of that existing investment and really line up all of the capability that's there and available to them.
I think another as well, if you look at some of the industries we've got here, they're very highly regulated, like finance, government, healthcare. And I think with cloud in general being secure by design, right, and very compliant, I think that's another benefit and a driver. Sometimes, these type of organizations are going to look to say, look, we've got this on premises or we've got a data center which is compliant to a certain level, but I just don't think from that perspective you can compete with like the AWSs and Microsofts of the world, because they're so like intertwined with like government agencies and things like that. So I think that's another a massive driver as well.
Yeah, especially when they've already invested heavily in those landing zones. They've already invested heavily in how they're securing them. And really, to get the most value out of all of that investment, running as many services inside of that existing kind of virtual four walls of their data center is the best way to deliver value out of that. So, where that service sits inside of that and ties into their identity, the networking, all of the other things that they've already set up, and it all integrates in as part of a seamless configuration. That's how they're getting more value out of not just the virtual desktop, but their entire investment in the stack as well.
So look, we've touched on AVD and Windows 365 already when it comes to that sort of cloud VDI space. I think this alone tells a massive story. If we look again, from the last 2 to 3 years, Microsoft's consistent sort of leadership position in that sort of Gartner Magic Quadrant, specifically for desktop as a service from 2003 to 2005 is again that's such a steep rise. And as you can see by this visual, Microsoft has sort of remained very, very much firmly in that top right quadrant as the leaders of DaaS, and that's that for 3 consecutive years. And I just don't think they're ever going to move from that top right. They've got that consistent sort of leadership when it comes to that sort of complete vision of DaaS, and that's why I think we're kind of mentioning AVD and Windows 365 within this discussion, because they are very much the leaders. And you mentioned it as well, Jared, about that integrated ecosystem advantage that it brings. Microsoft 365 stack integrating fully with their existing Azure services. And is that what you guys are seeing at Nerdio as well? That's kind of what's drawing people to it.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not even just those components. You think about something like Teams, for example. Historical optimization around end user compute and those sorts of things, getting audio optimizations and various things kind of running. It usually meant a vendor needed to reverse engineer a capability and then integrate it into the stack and do all these sorts of things. Once you're actually in the Microsoft ecosystem and consuming all those technologies evergreen, and as scary as that can be, it does help you kind of deliver that best-in-class user experience to your end users, because as soon as a new optimization or update is available, it's kind of 0 day in the platform versus waiting the next 6 months to update the endpoint client, the gateway, the broker, recurring service, all of these things that you've got to sort of line up to make sure that it all sort of works. It is all kind of cohesive in the way that it's integrated.
Microsoft's got a lot of momentum in the like you said, Shabaz, in the cloud VDI space, so AVD and Windows 365 and all that. What are the strategic advantages that AVD offers over other competitors? I know we've discussed this in other panel discussions that we've had at cubesys, but with this relevant to this topic, what are the advantages, and how should people that are looking for answers evaluate these when leaders plan their long-term digital workspace kind of strategy?
I think a big driver is, if you look at licensing with Microsoft specifically, a lot of their subscriptions already come with that Windows license that you need for things like AVD. Whereas if you use maybe, let's just say, for example, Amazon, for example, they have their sort of EUC VDI platform. It's an additional cost when it comes to licensing Office and Windows in that platform. So if you keep it within Microsoft, you get a lot more benefits when it comes to cost savings. So I think that's a big driver when it comes to AVD and Windows 365. But again, that sort of integration with the whole ecosystem, it just makes management a lot easier, being able to manage everything through things like Intune. And I think that integration just it kind of speaks for itself. Really, that's my take on it.
What do you have to say, Jared, in terms of Nerdio's perspective? Like, what are the things that people need to consider while they actually do make this decision?
I think everyone, obviously, I think most organizations want to have a multi-cloud or sort of hybrid cloud strategy, where they're obviously looking at, all of the various different hyperscalers or technologies that are there and available to them. But I think the reality is it's about, I guess, putting the right workload in the right cloud. And let's be honest, putting desktops and Microsoft and Windows desktops in the Microsoft cloud is probably the most cost-effective and best place to put it. Hey, you want to build some other, web app, native, whatever. Hey, maybe that's an AWS or a GCP, maybe where there's certain services or capabilities that exist inside of those platforms. But let's be honest, the best place to put those workloads is the Microsoft cloud, to Shabaz's point around some of those efficiencies around licensing. And also, as much as, sometimes, it's a big beast and there's a lot of different supporting components in there, it is ultimately that kind of one throat to choke when it comes to how you're delivering desktop experiences out to your end users.
Yeah. George, do you have, like, out of the 100 plus, deployments that you guys have done, do you have any examples of where this long-term digital workspace strategy sort of had a huge challenge? Or does anything come to mind that you had to solve with, the customer, and at the end of the day,
Yeah, look, each customer is obviously different, right? I think one of the sort of latest ones that I've had is customers that might not have a application packaging team or something like that really need to push applications to a VDI platform where they essentially are containerized, right? So using technologies like MSI App Attach, or sorry, App Attach now, it's been renamed, but essentially, when we have customers like that, where they don't specifically have an application team to do packaged applications, or they might not have an application that changes quite frequently, using things like App Attach to be able to publish applications, no matter the image, no matter the underlying infrastructure. It just works in containerized. It can be pushed to a Windows 10, to a Windows 11, to a server operating system. Doesn't really matter, right? So a lot of customers are looking to leverage all of the new, features that cloud has got to offer when it comes to, ease of maintenance and that kind of stuff. So
ease of maintenance and flexibility. I think you're talking about a lot of flexibility there, isn't it?
100%, yeah. The fact that you can chop and change and pull things out and put things back in as needed, and the whole idea of, I think Jared mentioned it earlier, because it's Windows 10 or Windows 11 operating systems, the look and feel to the end users is exactly the same. Things like OneDrive configuration back in the old server operating systems, we no longer need to run registry hacks and do all these dirty, workarounds to get OneDrive working. We've got the Teams integration that's now fully functional, fully there, out of the box. We've got all of the app attached stuff that works dynamically. There are so many benefits and less headache and less stress when it comes to moving to these VDI solutions that even just looking at the operational overhead, it's massive. It's one-click buttons, one-click deployments, that kind of stuff.
That's great.
Good question, Astha, again. So, look, we've spoken about where we've come from. We've spoken about kind of where we are right now. I'm quite interested in sort of if we have like a customer kind of story. George, again, Astha touched on, you've done touching 100 deployments, if not more, right? Since this whole cloud VDI kicked off many years ago. This is where we find ourselves. What are some aspects of the Microsoft solution you have seen that have attracted customers? But also, can you give us some sort of, a story, some customer stories that you worked with? You don't have to name specific customers, but I'd be interested to hear your experiences, specifically where customers transformed how they manage VDI in that cloud compared to how they managed it from legacy VDI.
Yeah, look, when it comes to Azure itself, right, it's an absolute beast. There are so many different components, so many different blades and areas that you can go and configure things, right? Pretty much every single customer that I've deployed a VDI solution with has been with Nerdio, right? So Nerdio has been deployed, or Nerdio Enterprise or NME or NMM have been involved in the setup and maintenance of their AVD process, right? Because Microsoft just don't offer what Nerdio have got to offer in terms of auto scaling, patch management, scripted actions, etc., etc. So every single customer has pretty much used Nerdio. When we look at training or having our our IT staff being able to understand how Azure works or all the different components and things like that, Nerdio is pretty much a single pane of glass, right? Everything that's required to run an AVD environment is inside that portal. So we can pretty much train our users once inside the Nerdio environment and then have them proactively use it in future and not need to essentially leave that environment to then go and do other tasks outside that. So I think having that single pane of glass is 100% a massive difference and helps users quite a lot. The other thing around what you've got up there on the slide is obviously we spoke about this earlier, but all of that stuff there that's in the yellow where we had to manage, deploy, patch, maintain, etc. It's no longer there anymore, right? So we can worry and focus on what is actually required by our end users and be able to push applications, servers, desktops, whatever the case might be, whether it's in AVD, whether it's in Windows 365. They both do the remote applications, they both do desktops. It's sort of like, pick what you want, how you want to do it. Do we have developers? Maybe we want to push them over to Windows 365. Maybe we have a whole bunch of, corporate application that we want to push, and we see there's a better value over in AVD. There's just so much different value in both of those environments that we can, again, pick and choose. We don't need to deploy nothing.
And I think with a lot of customers as well, that there's been a change in mind shift. Jared, you mentioned it earlier about how traditional kind of legacy VDI, you kind of just you got what you were given. There was no kind of user personas. But now with this change to Microsoft, with DAS, specifically Microsoft DAS now, it's even changed the name. It's not cloud VDI, it's end user compute now. It's all about that user experience. And again, I think tools like Nerdio, you mentioned Nerdio, George. Nerdio does really help with that end user experience. And make it very, very, all those things that were so painful before, very, very painless. So again, we've talked about, where we've been, where we are. I think it's pertinent now to move on to, what comes in the future. And I think, look, we can all agree that the future of VDI is going to be sort of intelligence and sort of automation and autonomous automation. AI and automation is being embedded into the fabric of cloud, right? And I think the delivery of desktop delivery is not going to be any different. Jared, if you can look into your crystal ball, right? I'm really interested to hear from you, especially some of the innovations that you see in cloud VDI, and how you think Nerdio specifically will enhance their already amazing solution, which has really, optimizes from management to cost, and try and even add more cost optimization if you can. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, look, 100%. So there's obviously a bunch of capabilities already in the tool. We're trying to, I guess, add in AI capabilities, I guess, where they make sense versus just kind of having to be a us too or a me too approach to AI. We're in a bit of a funny stage at the moment. We've got Ignite coming up next month, so we're in a bit of a dark period as far as product announcements. So there'll be some big announcements there for what will be a 7.5 release. But you've already started to see some of the capability we've added into the product. Obviously, we're assuming someone's got some knowledge of the Nerdio technology here, but I think autoscale insights, when you think about what that's trying to achieve, it's looking at, I guess, the historical usage patterns in the environment and being able to make kind of those predictive scaling assessments around what we should then be doing around the environment. Because let's be honest, we're deploying end users on a solution, and as we would have in the traditional day, but people keep more browser tabs open. They work longer hours, there's daylight savings, all of these things kind of change and evolve over time. So you might have put 100 users on a solution 6 months ago, but the way that they use and consume that technology and 12 months, 18 months later will change and evolve. So this cloud stuff isn't set and forget. So you need to be able to kind of continue to adapt. But I guess the challenge is we probably no longer have these dedicated VDI teams anymore that are just sitting there constantly kind of watching the environment. So you kind of need that agentic AI capability in there to be sort of monitoring its usage patterns and performance, and then be able to make those recommendations. I think where right today is around telling the admin to say, hey, review this, and then click a button to actually accept it. I think later on down the track, you'll start to see some of those things. And you already see that in our product around kind of auto healing and self-healing capability, which is probably more of an expert system than AI as it sort of sits today, where we already do those actions as they are, but enable the administrator to spend less time having to review the environment and let them make informed decisions to basically act on those opportunities to further optimize the environment or update it over time.
That was basically my question as well, following the AI angle, right? So cost reduction is one thing, but how do you maintain control, compliance, and scale the cloud desktop environment while all of this happens? So you've answered
you're
that.
Still going to need an admin there, right? Because you don't just want AI going off doing things, because it might have been a bit of dirty data. It's garbage in, garbage out when it comes to AI. So still putting the control on the admin's hands to react, but also, they're not spending time in spreadsheets, creating these things, doing this predictive analysis, doing all of the heavy lifting, and then allowing the administrator to, just interpret the data and then make an informed decision.
So I kind of want to round this discussion off now, because we've kind of, we're pretty much at the end of that journey that we wanted to discuss. We've seen where we've been, where we are now, and we're now finishing off this discussion about where we think it's going to be in the future. George, I really want to speak to you about this part, because AI is not that buzzword anymore, right? It was probably a year ago, and like everyone's like touching on it, and but now it's very much ingrained. Jared touched on the cost optimization and that part of it, but obviously us being techies, I'm very much interested to understand your thoughts on where you see the sort of AI powered control and automation, specifically self-healing infrastructures, automated sort of lifecycle management of the image, sort of that security policy enforcement when it comes to the future.
Yeah, good question, Shabaz. It really depends on where Microsoft is pushing AI as well, right? Because we can sit there and talk about AI until the cows come home, but essentially we're relying on the capabilities and where the integration is, where Microsoft turn around and integrate some of these AI solutions. So if we talk AI within Nerdio, that's already there. There are things there, as Jared mentioned. There's the tools, there's recommendations, there's SKU changes, utilization, etc. That we can turn around and say, okay, one click button, happy days. Nerdio recommends and advises us on sort of things that we need to change to then go ahead and do a lot of cost savings. When it comes to things like Microsoft native AI, it's pretty much anyone's game. We are essentially, how can I say it? We're pretty much we have the door open for them to create whatever we need, but it's also up to us to then turn around and say, okay, do we want to use AI to do some patch management and automation in the future? Do we look to Nerdio to go and create that? Do we do it with AI? Do we go and script our own scripts to go and essentially create some of these tasks or automations that we need? What kind of monitoring do we need? Do we want AI to be able to send through some of those notifications and essentially ping the sysadmin, or do we want to report, or do we essentially want something to happen in the background? So I think it's still really early. I mean, yes, it's been a year or two, like you mentioned, but it's moving so quick that you can't really point a finger at where it's going to be, come 6 months time, come to a year. So I think we as sysadmins, we need to turn around and utilize it as much as we can, and definitely figure out what we want to do with it, because it's not going anywhere. It's staying. And if anything, it's only going to get better, right? So we need to look at leveraging some of those solutions.
Yeah, and certainly like cost is incremental when it comes to savings. And I think, you've got the heavy hitted items around power on, power off. Yeah, that's a cost control. And it's kind of layering the cake, which over time obviously helps to reduce costs. So it's that incremental kind of change that everything's continuing to evolve. We're always adding new capabilities, and we're thinking about new ways to be able to do these types of optimizations. So yes, there is diminishing returns, but there's then leaps forward when a certain technology comes along, and kind of we then jump ahead again. So I think it's just keeping abreast of that as we move through. And obviously those 4 pillars or blocks there are really the main place where I can sort of see AI kind of coming in, not just around the cost piece, but also just how a VDI solution like that is going to actually enable companies to consume AI, in a safe and secure manner as well, right? Because ultimately, delivering virtual desktops only as good as the applications and the resources and the results that the end user gets out of it. So, these solutions are more of an enabler for people to be able to consume AI, as well as obviously AI will be a cornerstone in how we optimize those solutions to make it efficient to be able to deliver them as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Excellent. Well, look, that's kind of the panel discussion. And I want to thank Jared and George and Astha for being part of the panel. Thank you to our viewers as well for joining us. And yeah, that's it. I think Astha, that's a wrap, as they say.
Oh, right on time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jared, George, Shabaz. And yes, we're coming up with another one in a couple of weeks, securing the cloud supply chain. So yeah, please join us for that one. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.